Good morning, everybody. 17 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to the Sunrise Show. Craig Fernikin is your host, and thrilled to welcome onto the program from Utah, the great state of Utah, Utah State Representative from District 47, Ken Ivory. He's a estate planning attorney by trade, but state representative serving in District 47. Also the president of the American Lands Council, and the website is americanlandscouncil.org. And it's fascinating discussion because when you look, and I tell you what, Ken, I've never thought about this because growing up, you just thought the federal government was doing the right thing. In actuality, they're not doing the right thing. Anyway, Ken, good morning and welcome to the program.
Hey, Craig, thanks for having me on.
So the American Lands Council and your map, I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you need to check out the map because it is eye-opening to look. And from Nebraska west, it is showing the lands that the federal government is controlling, and these western region lands, the federal government has been asleep at the switch. We are not giving the lands back to the state as they are supposed to. Correct?
Yeah. So more than 50% of the land west of Nebraska, as you pointed out, it remains under the control of the federal government. But less than 5% of the land east of the Rocky Mountains is controlled by the federal government. And yet, Craig, the statehood promises called enabling acts or acts of admission, the statehood terms for the federal government to dispose of the land are virtually word for word the same in most cases. In fact, Oregon's statehood terms are almost identical to Illinois' or Missouri's. And Illinois at one point, Craig, was 95% federally controlled land for decades, along with states from Michigan to Iowa to Louisiana to that great western state over there, Craig, of Florida.
Now explain, Now Ken, explain to the listeners why the federal government did that, because why, when it went from territory to state, and why the federal government felt that they needed to keep control of that, and then they would hand it over as the state became in a statehood. Correct?
Yeah, and so exactly right. So the story actually begins in the Revolutionary War. You had 7 states that had control of the western lands. 6 of the states just simply had their colonial boundaries. They're in the middle of the Revolutionary War, and they're dead broke. And so they create a deal. They create what they called a trust, and what was called by the Supreme Court ever after a trust, where the states gave title to the western lands to the federal government, to their confederation, for 2 purposes: to pay the debt of the war, to pay the national debt, and to create distinct, equal, independent states. And they would say in their deeds of cession, no other use or purpose whatsoever. And so just recently, Craig, the Supreme Court reiterated a 150-year line of cases and said the constitutional equality of the states is essential for the harmonious operation of the republic. If we don't have an equality of states, our republic doesn't work. Because if you think about what's going on, the federal government, not until 1976 did they renege on their promise and duty to dispose of the land to create equal, independent states at statehood. 1976, they said, we're just going to keep all this land, but we'll give you a payment in lieu of the taxes you would otherwise generate if we had kept our promise. They call it PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. Well, what that means is the federal government extracts billions from states in the east to subsidize and cripple states in the west and be able to hold them politically hostage. Anytime the federal government wants to grow its programs, they say, hey, we're not going to pay you this money unless you vote for these new expansive programs at the federal level. Happens all the time. And so that balance is critical to the very harmonious operation of our nation. And so we're simply working to have the federal government honor the very same statehood terms with states west of the Rocky Mountains that it kept with all states east of the Rocky Mountains.
I want to ask about the politicians that were in power in 1976 that just basically laid down as the federal government did that because they knew the states' rights were violated, and they didn't even deal with that. But I wonder now, talk about the legislation now, where there's some traction in Congress, and this 2647, that's the Federal Resilience Act, right? That's starting to become, okay, they're going to maybe be giving some of this land to the states.
Yeah, any major political movement starts with the dialogue. It starts with education. And so, Craig, as you mentioned, that's why it's so critical that people go to the AmericanLandsCouncil.org website, AmericanLandsCouncil.org. Right on the front page, you can get a document it's basic facts. It's a brochure that kind of walks through the basics on this. And then we have to hire and inspire our leaders to battle for liberty and property and self-governance. And these are solutions big enough to solve our tremendous national problems. And so that debate is moving forward all over the nation. Every Western state except California this year introduced legislation related to the transfer of public lands. In Utah just yesterday, we hired, we've appropriated $2 million to hire special legal counsel and folks to work on the relations between and among the states and with Congress. We've got the top constitutional lawyers in the nation engaged on this. And then, as you mentioned, in Congress, Congressman Bishop, who chairs the Natural Resources Committee, and then Congressman Stewart from Utah, have formed and chair a group called the Federal Land Action Group to look at the mechanisms moving forward for transferring the public lands for more effective local control.
You know, it's fascinating because then you look at the, destruction of fire and that kind of thing, and we've got a break coming up. But it's interesting, Ken, that you do that, and you're actually going to be traveling to Cottage Grove for Saturday. It's the Rally Around the Flag, June 20th, and you're going to be one of the featured speakers there, and there's going to be an Oregon land panel, and everyone is invited. It's a free event from 10 to 4 up there at Cottage Grove. The Oregon Citizens Lobby will have a table there, but it's a Rally Around the Flag, June 20th, and it's great to have you, come out, Ken, with all the knowledge that you're seeing. This, and it's so interesting. I was talking to our listeners. If you take Oregon at 53%, and you take Iowa at 0.3%, and some of the states, I've got the chart here, it's sickening when you think about it, less than 10%. And I thought, okay, what if Oregon had 10% controlled? Think what we could do as Oregonians with 43% more land.
Yeah, exactly right. And so you have what is world-class resource in your forests. And that world-class resource, when you were tending the garden, if you will, you're keeping the forest at sustainable tree density levels and maintaining a healthy forest that provides healthy air quality, that provides healthy watersheds. In doing that, that also provided funding for education and public safety.
Oh, yeah.
There was an NPR story not too long ago about Josephine County, where a woman calls 911 and she says, "Hey, I've got somebody breaking my door down." And the 911 operator said, "Well, can you ask him to go away? Can you go around him? Can you call the sheriff tomorrow?" Because they only operate between 9 and 5 Monday to Friday, because they've lost their budget and have gone from 30 sheriff's deputies down to 2 because they can no longer harvest and maintain sustainable tree densities in the forest. And so now you have what was a tremendous asset, environmental, economic, recreational asset, is now a catastrophic liability all over your state and all over the West.
Oh, it's horrible. And, Ken, I just talked about that. We do have a break coming up. I want to take that and then come back. Ladies and gentlemen, Utah State Representative Ken Ivory from District 47. He's also the president of the American Lands Council. Get to their website, AmericanLandsCouncil.org, and we'll come right back. We'll have more with Ken Ivory after this.
So get up. Top of the morning to ya.
Good morning, everybody. 35 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to the Sunrise Show, and thrilled to welcome back Ken Ivory. He's the president of the American Lands Council, but that's on his off time. He's a real estate planning attorney, but currently right now he's the Utah State Representative for District 47, and good enough to take some time with us because he's going back into session in Utah. And Ken, it's great to have you on the program. We talked earlier about the rights of land and why the federal government does what it does with this trust that they're supposed to give back to the states. But you said something that was so excellent, Ken. You said, rights we don't know are no better than rights we don't have.
Yeah, that's right. If we don't understand our history and we don't understand the basic fundamentals of our nation, that our nation was founded on the principles of liberty and property and self-governance. And property is the essence of liberty. And so where the federal government can control and exploit 53% of Oregon, 50% of the entire West, as the federal government is engineered to grow. I mean, that's what governments do unchecked.
Right.
They're just engineered to grow. And if you can exploit the entire western United States for votes so that you get petty favors and gratuities from Congress, well, then you can exploit all those votes and the federal government continues to grow. And those in the East, they continue to extract billions of dollars from folks in the East to mismanage and burn and pollute our lands. No, we need to get to a point where we have more effective local control so that we can fund education and public safety and take care of our sick people and poor people and have a healthier environment, healthier watersheds, better access for recreation opportunities. Right now, under federal control, it's lose, 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 Craig. I mean, it's poor access, poor health, and depressed productivity.
In Josephine County, I mean, we talk about Oregon, 53% overall, but Josephine County, it's 70%. And you're thinking, how in the world? In fact, the legislation for the state of Oregon just passed last year in the event that a county is not sufficient in their funding, if they're deficit, that they have to, the commissioners now have an ability to go to the state and say, we need help. And they come in and they would file a lien against the county finances until they get back on their feet.
Yeah, and you think of how sad that is, where, it was not more than a decade or two ago that Josephine County and Jackson County and these others, they were entirely self-sufficient because they were able to utilize their world-class resource, this incredible timber resource, and you had this kind of positive circle of life, right? You harvested the trees to the sustainable tree density level, so you had the healthy forest that was regenerating itself. The revenue from that created living wage jobs that funded education and public safety. You didn't have the catastrophic wildfires that are polluting and burning wildlife in the millions and destroying watershed for generations. It was interesting. I was with Senator Mike Lee last week in D.C., and we were talking about this, and he said, this is just like that Lion King movie, where you've got, under Simba, you've got this circle of life, and under the management of Scar with the jackals and the hyenas and the tight-fisted control, everything dies. And that's what we're seeing throughout the West. Communities are literally dying because they're deprived of the ability to control and manage their own lands and their own resources, those whose lives and livelihoods depend upon the land, that are going to be the most wise stewards. In fact, Canada discovered this, Craig. I mean, they've transferred land, water, and resources to the provinces and territories over the last decade or so because they discovered, get this in Canada, right? They discovered that if the people closest to the land, water, and resources make the decisions, they get a better decision.
Oh,
and so Canada's working with their local governments in good faith. We're simply looking to our federal partner to work with the states in good faith, honor the very same statehood terms to transfer that land. And it works to the benefit of the communities, the states, and the nation. We have more recoverable oil than the rest of the world combined, locked up in federally controlled lands just in Utah, Colorado, Wyoming. We can't put a fighter jet in the air or a battleship on the water without rare earth elements. Right now, China controls 95% of the market. They're locked up on federally controlled lands all over the West. This is national security, economic security, environmental health. There are solutions big enough. So we need to have people go to that website, AmericanLandsCouncil.org, and right on the very front page, they'll see a basic facts document that they can download that document, share it with their friends, and then it's up to us to hire and inspire our leaders to battle for these solutions that are big enough to solve our national problems.
Ken, I talk about this all the time. Is I talk, empowering folks to do this, and that the critical mass. Because one of the most recent things, and we're almost out of time, but the critical mass was with the Veterans Administration, and you saw nationally where over 100,000 people in all 50 states started raising their arms and getting upset. And that critical mass, all of a sudden, you saw the federal government and Senate and Congress start to go, and their eyes got a little big, and they said, hey, we should do something. And it took a couple of years, but 100,000 people in America did this. Well, we need the same here with this transfer of public lands. 100,000 people, critical mass. You can better believe that Senate and Congress are going to start getting the message.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, also on the website, you can find full legal analyses. 85 pages, hundreds and hundreds of footnotes on the federal government has a compact duty. They have a contractual trust duty to honor the same promises to states west of the Rockies as they did with states east of the Rockies. Think about this, Craig. Illinois, President Obama's state of Illinois, it was 90% federally controlled for decades. And Illinois rallied with all of its neighboring states that were also 90% federally controlled. They battled and simply refused to take no for an answer. They compelled Congress to transfer the lands to those for more local control. This has already been done.
Yeah.
It goes back to that same thing we talked about. But if we don't know our rights and we don't exercise our rights, it's no better than rights we don't have.
Oh, amazing. Ken, it's fascinating to have you on to talk about this. And I do tell our listeners, just the other day, I started this by saying, you know what? You either are for us or against us. You can't be in that lukewarm middle, because no decision is a decision. You must step up and make your rights known and your views known. You don't have this luxury anymore of sitting back. And I was talking about security and illegal immigration and all these things, and it just transcends right back into, like you said, liberty, property, and self-governance. So.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan said this is a wonderful time to be alive. We're lucky not to live in pale and timid times. We've been blessed with the opportunity to stand for something, and there are things worth fighting for. Our communities are worth fighting for. Our way of life is worth fighting for. The security of our nation and the economic security of our nation really is at stake. But there are solutions. We simply have to stand up and get back to that original recipe: liberty, property, self-governance. Imagine those founders really understood the basics of getting to peace and prosperity. So, hey, Craig, thanks for having me on. Have AmericanLandsCouncil.org Facebook page, American Lands Council. Share that information far and wide, and we'll look forward to being in beautiful Cottage Grove, Oregon on Saturday, and look forward to seeing all your listeners out there.
Exactly. Ken, thanks so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Utah State Representative Ken Ivory is also the president of American Lands Council, AmericanLandsCouncil.org, and he's headed back into session. So, Ken, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Craig.
All
My
right.
pleasure.
Take care. All right, we got to get to a break. More on the Sunrise Show coming up. Woo! Wow, that gives me some goosebumps. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen. That will empower you to do that. And Ken is traveling to Cottage Grove Saturday, a rally around the flag. I'll put that link up on our Facebook page as well. We'll be back after this quick break. ABC Sports is up, and then we'll be back on the Sunrise Show on News Radio 880 KCMX.